Okay, welcome to Road Warrior Without an Expense Account. This is a presentation I did as I launched my book of the same title, Road Warrior Without an Expense Account. This came out in May 2008, and it documents my experiences as a freelance musician and just some trends I see happening in the world of freelance music. So, we're just going to go through this. Today I'm going to point out some of the highlights of this book. You can find this book off of my website at doublebassblog.org, or you can just search for Road Warrior Without an Expense Account on Amazon or on barnesandnoble.com. It's available from many sources. And you can always go to my website, of course, and find it there. So this presentation is titled, as you can see, Life After Music School. So we're just going to talk about a few of the key points in the book. Now, work routines for a freelance musician. I played with dozens of ensembles during my time as a freelance musician, including, as you can see, just many regional Chicago groups like the Elgin Symphony, the Chicago Opera Theater, Chicago Philharmonic, but also the Milwaukee Ballet. Going up to Milwaukee, you can see the Rockford Symphony, and then we're even spreading out from there. The Des Moines Metro Opera, the Iris Chamber Orchestra, which is actually down in Memphis, Tennessee. So, and if you include the Spoleto Festival, which is in South Carolina, the Brit Festival in Oregon, I played in a typical year, sometimes coast to coast, but definitely through a good 5-6 states. Yet, and here's the depressing fact, and this is what this book is about, to a high degree, my net yearly income from all these jobs, even when I was working 7 days a week, which is pretty typical for a freelance musician, is pretty low. We're talking, after taxes, we're talking 20, 30 grand at best. And this can be misleading because the income coming into a freelance musician can actually be much greater than that. Before you start figuring expenses and taxes, you can be thinking, oh, wow, I'm making what an orchestra musician in a major orchestra is making. You might think that you're making $60,000, maybe even $70,000. But once you start to really factor in all these expenses, self-employment tax, and all these other factors, you realize that it is quite difficult to make a living as a freelance musician. So, 50,000 miles a year, 4 cars for me in 5 years, at least 5 different states. That's probably a little bit low. Tank of gas per day is pretty common for me, at least when I was in the heyday of doing this kind of work. No benefits, no security. Is this what I signed up for? Well, it's not what I imagined I'd be getting into as I went to music school. So, the hidden costs of freelance work are really the thing that you've got to look out for. The biggest hidden cost is driving. Now, how much does it really cost to get to gigs? Well, this is a study that came out of the Chicago Tribune in the spring of 2008. And now I'm recording this right now at the very end of 2008, and gas prices have decreased substantially. But, let's check in a year and see where they're at. At this point, in April of 2008, small cars were the actual operating cost per mile, what it really costs when you figure in mileage and you figure in tolls and those kind of expenses, 55.1 cents per mile. And you can see it goes up from there. When you get into the kind of car that I need to drive as a bass player, we're talking 85 cents per mile easily. Now, gig distance, as you can see, has a radical effect on your overall compensation. This is where you can get fooled. You can imagine that you're making X amount of dollars, but when you start to figure in these expenses, you can see the reality is that it's much less. Now, some of these mileage figures might seem extreme for someone who's not a freelancer, but anyone who does do freelance work realizes that they are driving, 168 miles, like we've got the Milwaukee Ballet. That's a very common round-trip commute for freelancers. And that Madison Symphony, 320 miles. I also know many musicians that drive that far on a daily basis to do these kind of gigs. So you can see, if you have even a mid-sized car and you're driving to Madison, Wisconsin from Chicago, Illinois, you're spending $230 in actual cost. So consider what you're making. Are you making $230? Well, maybe you are, maybe you're not. Either way, you've got to factor that into your choice of employment. Now, when we apply these figures to gig pay scales, you can see that if you have a $100 gig in town, you can see that working close to home is just a huge factor. So if we're taking a $100 gig, no matter what kind of car you drive, if it's just a few miles away, you're obviously pocketing all of that. Now look at how much you start to lose as you start to get farther away. Even if we take that Milwaukee, Wisconsin distance, that 180-mile round trip from Chicago, even in a smaller size car, you're not only not making money, you're actually losing money. You're losing $29.42. You got a mid-size SUV, you're losing $63.80. And again, gas prices have gone down, but that's not going to necessarily mean that they won't skyrocket again in a couple of months. And even with them at their current rates, these figures are still not far off. This is the federal mileage rate in 2008. That's how I calculated these figures, and that's how the Chicago Tribune calculated their figures. So now, if we apply these figures to 1 gig, you take 150 miles round trip, $90 per service, no mileage, no cartage. Let's take a look at what we've got. Okay, so the operating cost of our vehicle would be $136.50. Okay, that's not good. By the way, these figures come from my work in the Milwaukee Ballet, so I know these through personal experience. The operating cost of the vehicle is $136.50. Tolls per trip, $5, $8 to park. So we're talking negative $59.50 per service. Now, if we multiply that out toward your typical week, you're actually making negative $267 for the week. Okay, now obviously, this work makes no financial sense, right? Yet, countless music graduates work these sort of jobs, and sometimes for their entire professional life. You might not think that's what you're going to be ending up doing, but you look down the road and 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you realize, oh, well, this is what I'm doing. Now, many musicians combine dozens of such gigs together, going from state to state each week and playing these kind of regional orchestra jobs.